Hello everybody and welcome to this month's specifying practice group call. David Lewis, over to you.
Well, thanks Matt for the introduction, and gosh, you gotta bear with us today because we've thrown Matt into a role where he hasn't done before for a while anyhow, running the slide for us, the Prezi. So if you hear the infamous ding from any of your grade school days when you had slideshows running in the classroom, you'll know what it's about. So, Lewis, we're here.
Hello, David.
Yes, beautiful, wet, foggy southern New Jersey, where we just experienced torrential rains last week. Gosh, we had over 8 inches of rain in less than a day, and most of that fell in 4 hours. So, and we're in rain again. So how are you down in beautiful Nashville?
Oh, it's fine. It's sunny and mild here. We had some patchy dense fog this morning because we'd had rains the previous couple days, but looking good. And
is Nashville getting ready to roll out the red carpet?
Oh, we are really getting ready, and all of our fans will want to come to the chapter event where yours truly is going to practice mind over mandolin with a couple of my partners from Memphis, and we're going to play some bluegrass for you out on the square to attract people in or scare people away from the Country Music Hall of Fame where the chapter event will be held.
And you get inducted that night, don't you?
Not exactly.
Oh, okay. I was looking forward to that. So Lewis, you said that we had a special attendee on our list today. Did you notice?
Mr. Wayne Yancey. And he was the inspiration for today's session, and I hope, Wayne, you will feel free to not only type in some questions, but maybe stick up your hand and speak a few words of encouragement or correction, as that may be, as we go through the presentation. No hard questions, though. That's not allowed.
Well, if they give us any hard ones, you get to field those.
No, actually, my job is to ask David the hard questions and see if I can stump him.
Well, you usually do a good job of that too. Okay, so Matt, you want to go ahead on to the next one, and you can see by our lack of creativity in today's session, there are no graphics, so you're going to be hopefully entertained by all of the words.
And our snappy repartee.
Yeah, instead of really nice photos. So the idea today, anyhow, is to go through overall what happens with these references and the related documents and related requirements that are all specified in Part 1 of technical sections, and how are we approaching it, and how's the industry approaching it, and how should we approach it and see if we're actually doing it right and see if there's some sort of consensus.
Or does it even make any difference?
Or, yeah, maybe it doesn't. Maybe we shouldn't be doing it. We've been doing it wrong for a lot of years. I don't know.
Or maybe it's the old tempest in a teapot where we get all excited and hot and bothered about something that nobody really cares about.
Maybe that's true too. We'll find out today, I guess.
And please stay tuned to the end because we have an exciting announcement about next month's presentation that I think is going to be really of a great deal of interest, and I think it's going to be really interesting. We're going to have a guest panelist with us.
I thought you were going to give it away.
Not yet. No, I want to tease them into sticking through this rather turgid stuff until the end.
Okay. Well, press on, Matt. Let's see what we've got in store. Okay.
So we have the Holy Writ. Say it once and in the right place.
Well, makes a lot of sense when we start talking about it that way. And then if that's the case, if we really are trying to say it once and in the right place, do we really need to repeat an awful lot of the information where we start looking at related documents and related sections, now called related requirements? So what do you think, Louis? I know you and I approach this just a little bit differently.
Well, I agree with the basic concept. I just see no sense at all in repeating comply with manufacturer's instructions in every individual product section throughout the project manual. On the other hand, from time to I do like to give the subcontractors some warning, because they may not have Division 1 in front of them, that there are some requirements over there that present hoops that they have to jump through. And we'll talk about those as we get on a little further, but I am firmly committed to saying it once and in the right place, but sometimes you need to point people where that right place is.
Yeah, I subscribe more to the second statement here. All docs are related. And if that's the case, I shouldn't have to reference anything to anybody to get them to understand anything about what I write. So
well,
if
there's two things that going on here. Of course, one is, yes, in terms of the actual legal document, if we approach it from what are the legal requirements, yes, that's very true. But I think what we're going to see as we go through this discussion today is what is user-friendly. What are there things that we can do to help the contractor understand what our general intent is? And incidentally, those of you who are coming to the convention, David is going to present an educational session on that very subject on Wednesday the 25th, isn't it?
There's one on Wednesday, yes.
So everybody will want to sign up for that.
Well, thanks for that plug, Louis.
So we do have to, and we do want to, because if the contractor can't find the information quickly, I think most contractors, subcontractors, suppliers will make a good faith effort. But after 3 or 4 minutes, if they can't find it, or if they don't even know to look for it, it may be RFI time, and we want to avoid that. But I certainly agree with David's assertion that all construction documents are related. They should be a single, holistic group that forms the contract documents. And so it is actually one construction contract, not two. And there we go.
Right, but what I think I hear you saying is that maybe the answer lies somewhere in the middle, instead of taking an absolute approach one way or the other.
Well, let's get into it a little further. And we'll see where this goes.
Go ahead, Matt. Oh. Okay, I had to add this just for a little bit of background information. Uniform location of subject matter.
Oh, is that what awesome means?
Yes. Well, it's a great little document.
And who wrote that document?
Excuse me?
Who wrote it?
Who wrote it? I think just about everybody had their hand in it. And
yeah,
it comes from US EJCDC, AIA, CSI.
I think a couple of the contracting associations.
I think you're right. The nice part about it, uniform location subject matter, it's been around for a long time. It was out of print for a long time, and it's recently back.
Yeah, but the great thing about it is it really does embody an industry standard in the sense of this is what everybody agrees where information should be.
Right.
And so for those of you who are just getting started in the art and science of writing specifications, do download this thing from CSI and familiarize yourself with it. It's a very useful, handy tool, and of course very affordable.
Certainly affordable at free.
Being freebie,
that
yes.
got my attention. And it was really nice. I know that we had a representative from CSI on this latest round of update to it. Joel Altland, a mechanical engineer, was helping to get this edition done, and I was so glad to see it back in print. But I did go back and check to see what it has to say about reference standards and or references in general. And the only thing that it really talks about is reference standards, meaning things like ASTM references or AMA type references. And it does say that lists of reference standards are most appropriate in Division 1, and a secondary location to include it would be in the technical sections, Divisions 2 to 49. I almost said 50, but 49. Okay, so it's the only place that it's talking about references and reference standards. So it doesn't really offer a lot of advice because it's only talking about lists of standards. So go ahead, Matt. So this should look familiar to everybody. Anybody that's writing specs, reading specs, enforcing specs, trying to interpret specs. Section format tells us we start each section with Part 1 General. We start Part 1 General with Summary, and we usually have Section Includes. And from there, the departure begins. Go ahead, Matt. Matt fell asleep at the switch. There we go.
Now this looks like an excerpt from section format.
It is, and how did you guess that?
I cheated, I look.
Okay. But yeah, section format under the summary article gives us these 4 broad headings. Section Includes, and then the 2 products statements, products furnished and products installed, and then the final paragraph, related requirements. I have my own impression as to how each of these should probably be used and how I try to use them. And section format does offer some general guidance on this, but let's just forward to the next slide, Matt.
Before you get started, Tommy Smith has a question. He says, can a requirement be found in 1 minute by a person who is knowledgeable in the proper location of subject matter, master format, and section format? He's referring to the old 1 minute rule that if I want to know what sealant is used around the windows in a brick wall and I pick up the project manual, I should be able to find that in less than a minute, within a minute.
Hey, Tommy, and I would say with today's technology, why does it take a minute?
That's right. If we are issuing our project manuals in CD, we can do a word search and let the computer do the hard stuff.
Well, and even still, you think about the time that we spend searching using Google or Bing or any of the other online tools. We land on a website, for instance, looking for information, and the knowledge today tells us if we're more on that site more than 10 seconds and can't find what we're looking for, we're probably gone.
Yes.
So we need to make it that easy, even using construction specs, to be able to find information. Don't you think?
We do want to make it user-friendly.
We do. Absolutely. Don't you think?
Absolutely.
So the architect spends, at least 2 or 3 days producing the documents, but, the contractor gets, an hour to put together his bid.
Well, do you use these sample paragraphs B and C very often?
I rarely use those two paragraphs, rarely. And I have an example of what I do actually later on in the presentation. I tend not to use any one of these three. And I'll go back to the statement where all of the product or all of the contract documents are related, all sections are related, and I tend to treat any mention of related requirements, because section format is the example that they give for related requirements is really a listing of other spec sections that may be related somehow or other to the current section that you're writing. So if we go to the next slide, we'll probably start to get into some of that. So there you are with the two products paragraphs. Are these really necessary, especially if you're using related requirements? Because you could accomplish the exact same thing with a single listing, in my opinion. Because typically, I would see a related requirements section listed so that you would have the section title or number and title, plus a reason that you believe that it is related.
For example, you could say installation of a product that's supplied in the current section but is not installed there, or vice versa.
Yes. Yeah, so you could say, if it's, I don't know, I can't think of one off the top of my head, but you can list any particular reason why you think it may be related. Maybe it's something that's normally specified in this section, and for whatever reason, you choose to specify it elsewhere. I had a discussion earlier today about structural sealants. Their sealants, do they belong in the sealant section, or do they belong elsewhere, say with curtain wall?
Dave, a couple things. Let's get caught up with some questions, and also please be mindful of the placement of your phone, because we've had a comment that sometimes your volume is going in and out a little bit.
I'll try to be careful. Thank you.
Steve Laundrie says, I would suggest two similar questions should be asked. Is the specification required to, in parenthesis, include information more than once, end quote, or in parenthesis? Is the specification expressing the project requirements most effectively by including similar information in more than one location? And which of these two questions is the best means to communicate the project design intent? Well, Steve, rather than try to answer that right now, I think that's kind of the gist of this whole presentation, and we'll see if we can bring some closure for that. Wayne Yancey, whose idea this was, asks, Dave, have you experienced negative feedback from your stated practice to omit related requirements?
And the answer to that one, Wayne, I have not. I will tell you, and realize I'm working as an independent specifier. So compared to, say, maybe an in-house specifier, and I don't know if there's going to be a distinction on this particular topic. I look at the related requirements listing as something that takes time but contributes very little to the outcome of the project. And if I can take and spend that time elsewhere, and give the project better value, I would much rather do that. For me to spend the time to coordinate the listing for related requirements might be 15 minutes per section to run through, make sure that all of the different sections that might have some bearing on the section that I'm writing, make sure we have section numbers and titles correct, the correct references, and by the time you balance that across the entire project, you've spent a good deal of time trying to do that coordination, and I think it's better spent elsewhere.
I too use the related requirements very, very sparingly. It's just, you know, some of the things that are listed in master spec, bless their hearts, are just so egregiously obvious that, you know, why bother? But there are times when there's a clarification as that what you're looking for ain't here, go to this section instead. We have a comment from Clifford Marvin. Master spec evaluation sheets used to direct architects to list sections which contain work you would expect to find in this section, and that's kind of what we were talking about. That's the basic purpose behind the related sections, and actually those other two samples from section format. Steve Groth says an example would be loose steel lintels furnished in Division 5 but installed under Division 4. Hey, good example, Steve. Thanks. And Ron Lincolns says related sections better to list none than to list some and not all.
I think that's the key here, actually, because how far do you go? Where do you stop?
Oh, that's true.
Because it's all in the mind of the beholder as to what's important and what's not. Gosh, as a specifier we say it's not important, but the poor contractor out there trying to figure it out is looking for something that we don't list.
One time in the late 80s, I was doing a set of specifications for a medium-sized project. It was like a $10 million new building. And just as an experiment, I published the whole set of specifications without section includes and without related sections.
And how did it go?
Nobody noticed. I didn't get a single word of feedback either from the contractor or our internal contract administration people.
No one noticed. I am surprised no one said anything. Especially if you eliminated section includes.
Yes, but they just, people were probably just turning straight to Part 2 to see what was in there, and it didn't seem to bother anybody. But I only did it the one time. I still think it's a handy thing, if nothing else, just even from our own internal CA people.
Okay. I see a question from Larry Prins. Let me ask you this one, Les.
Okay.
It says our office uses SpecLink, which does not use a summary article. Section includes related requirements and submittals. How common is this? I think what he's saying is SpecLink uses section includes related requirements and submittals as the article titles.
Yes. And in my heart of hearts, I prefer that, but because we deal with master spec, it's too much trouble to go through several hundred sections and change that.
Well, and I would say, remember, in spec or in section format, Larry, if you read the text that goes along with it, any one of the titles that are listed in section format can be used as an article title.
Yes.
So and you don't have to use all of them. So what SpecLink is doing is perfectly acceptable.
Edward Heinens asks, I wonder if listing related requirements can be considered more of a courtesy than a documentation requirement. If something is not listed, isn't an omission. And no, that's an important concept. I'm glad that you brought up, Edward, is that somewhere in Division 1 we need to have a little statement that says section includes and related requirements are for the convenience of the reader to locate information and do not constitute a limitation on the content of this spec section or the work that is required by that section. And that's one of the reasons why, of course, we use the term section includes rather than work included, which some of our MEP consultants haven't got that good news yet. Dave Metzger says related sections include but are not limited to the following. This paragraph cross-references requirements a reader might expect to find in this section but are specified in another section. It is not intended to be and shall not be interpreted as a listing of every other section that has a relationship to this section. And yeah, that's something like that can be put in Division 1, say it once in the right place. Tommy says my latest NAFAC specifications did not use section includes or related sections. They relied upon the required submittals article to scope the section. I don't...
Wow, really? I didn't...
That's interesting.
Yeah, I have to go check that, Tommy. Thanks. I'll have to look into that one.
And Rosa Cheney says if you do not have the statement in Division 1 regarding related sections are for convenience, etc., then is there liability when you include some but not all related section? Is there anyone that has found this to be the basis of a lawsuit? I don't know, but I suspect that would be very much an uphill battle for an adversary to claim that that was somehow an omission. Those are pretty obviously, they're like the table of contents. It's, you know, for convenience, but it does not necessarily have any real legal status as such.
Well, in section
Besides,
format,
if the contractor can't find something, guess what happens? It's RFI time, right? You're going to hear about it long before the lawyers send you a letter.
Right. Well, in section format too, Louis, I was amazed actually. I went back and reread this, and under the related requirements, it actually says that it is for information only. And I was actually surprised to see that because we stress so much that the specifications are contract requirements, and to have that statement included in section format was a bit of a surprise.
Yes, but we're going to see another one, another article in Division 1 that is also basically for information only and does not result in work. And,
right.
We'll get on
Shall
to
we
that.
press on?
Let's see. Tommy Smith says, having done many ready checks, a reference to a related section that does not exist becomes an omission by default. I'm not sure what you mean by that, Tommy, but let's go on.
Here, this is a question actually for me. What about the Division 1 references? Because the related requirements, I think, even from section format, it cautions against listing Division 1 sections as related requirements. So when are we using Division 1 references? How are we using them? Or should they be included at all? I've seen a number of spec sections. I know spec text was written this way because Division 1 was not included in the related requirements listings, that articles that related directly back to a Division 1 section did start. Each one of those articles started with the direct reference back to Division 1. And I think this was a hangover from trying to make sure that subcontractors or suppliers that were trying to bid a particular section knew that Division 1 applied to their section. What's your experience on this, Louis?
Well, I think that's the intent. When I first started using Master Spec in October of 1982, I saw that famous or infamous related documents paragraph. And I said, what the heck is that? Because it wasn't in the textbook that had, in the Cohen, in the Rosen textbook that I had bought at my previous firm where I was writing the occasional specification, and it wasn't in a lot of the specs that I'd read previously. So I actually called up Master Spec and asked somebody, I said, is this really necessary? And one of the technical authors at the other end rather sheepishly said, no, not really. So I've been omitting it ever since. And the big thing is because it appears at the beginning of every section, and it's this little dense sentence, a lengthy sentence with dependent clauses, that I think people's eyes just go right past it, and so it's not very meaningful. Now, this is the area where David and I depart a little bit in terms of our philosophy, is that in my submittals article, I like to put a paragraph that says, prepare submittals per requirements of section 01 3300. Because I know that many times the subcontractors get a hold of a section and they may not have direct access to Division 1, and they want to know how many copies of, in the old days when we did paper submittals, or what kind of ridiculous requirements is this unreasonable architect going to make me perform before I can do my submittals, and so they don't bounce back on me. And so for convenience, I put that in there to say, okay, here's where to find that information. And I use that very sparingly. I also use it in delivery, storage, and handling, so that I can avoid relisting all the apple pie and mom statements. And in execution, I'll say refer to perform perform work in accordance with section 01 7300. Just those three places, and again, it's intended for convenience.
But Lewis,
yes,
we've got to drag these folks into the 21st century. We're not. Most of these projects are not being issued in paper copy anymore.
That's true.
There's
or at least
really
not on my office.
There's no excuse that they don't have access to the documents.
Right.
We're issuing project manuals as single documents, searchable PDF files. Well, there's no reason that they can claim that. They didn't know.
Oh, it's not so much protected against a claim. It's just I see it as a friendly reminder, but
okay.
It's just purely optional, obviously.
We have a couple of comments. Did you realize we have John Gwill on the call?
Oh, we got a lot of them, yes.
Yes. And John, apparently, I didn't know this. John, you were involved in the section format, the last update for 2006, and you're telling us that this whole debate about was covered by the task team, and that I'm lost track of which clause it was that you said was added, and I think it had to do with that it was only for information, these listings.
Right.
So thanks for the comment, John. It's always nice to hear some of the background behind these documents.
And occasionally one does still see the specification where the first article, instead of being summary or section includes, is scope of work. Now that definitely has some liability implications, because if you don't list it there, that could be interpreted against the AE. Let's see. Elias Saltz says inspect link under submittals article. There is a reference to the Division 1 submittals procedures section. Okay. Tommy Smith also echoes that. Jim Carlisle says Division 1 is a requirement for all other divisions. Correct. And yes, we mentioned that earlier, that all the documents are related, but Division 1 governs. As a matter of fact, that's one of the recommended, even the AIA recommends that as a supplementary condition, to state that Division 1 of the specifications govern the execution of all other specifications. And if you don't have that in the supplementary conditions, you can put it in Division 1, that statement.
Okay, and I see Sheldon Wolf's asking whether or not we include a reference to all Division 1 and Division 0. That discussion's coming up, Sheldon. Hang on. We'll be there in a second.
Yes, of course. Division 0 does not have any specifications, although it might have some, but not all. Well, anyway, don't want to steal your fire, bro. Yeah, don't want to steal your fire. Marty Thornton says, I like to reference Division 1 section summary of work when the project is multiple primes. Now that's, of course, a different condition. It alerts primes to the requirements for coordination. And of course, that was one of the great blessings, Marty, of when I moved to Tennessee from Ohio. There were a number, but that was a great one, is that when we do public works down here, we don't have to mess around with multiple prime contracts. And Paul Gerber's...
Lewis, this gives you the perfect... Wait, what's the publication date for your new document?
Oh, for multiple work packages, not multiple primes.
Well, okay. It could be because you can take the concepts and apply it to both.
Well, not really, because in the multiple prime projects, you have the problem that you have to scope what work each of the prime contractors, or in the case of the GC and prime subcontractors, is going to be doing. For example, I had a case many years ago in Ohio where the contractor was claiming an extra because in this Division 1 I had assigned certain work to the general contractor. For example, that the general contractor was responsible for removing ice and snow from the job sites to provide safe access by all the workers, no matter who was employing them. And the contractor who had underbid the project was claiming a number of different complaints against the city of Cincinnati. But one of the complaints was, he stated in the lawsuit, I am the contractor for the general construction contract, but I am not the general contractor, but I did the work assigned to the general contractor, therefore I'm entitled to additional funds. His believability was somewhat compromised by the fact that he was prosecuting his lawsuit from his new living quarters at the Lebanon Correctional Institute, where he was serving time for having sold drugs on the job site, which we think was his real business.
Oh, yeah, okay.
But from then on, of course, I had a paragraph in my Division 1 that said the contractor for the general construction contract shall be known as the general contractor.
Okay. So, Matt, we should probably press on.
Paul Gerber does say some contractors will only distribute particular electronic sections to subcontractors. I get a number of calls for bidders lists every project despite pre-qualified bidder section included in the project manual. So that does happen, that a subcontractor may not have access to Division 1 unless he asks for it or she asks for it. Are you going to sing this for us?
No, you really don't want to listen to me sing, but I can ask everybody to remember the song and just hum along. I couldn't help myself because this was such a contentious sort of a debate that it just reminded me so much of this Ella Fitzgerald song that I had to do this. And I think that no matter what we do, by the time we get done, we're still not going to probably have an answer, but this is the current practice. We're seeing every imaginable kind of response to how we list these documents, related requirements, related sections, related documents, and we'll probably continue to see it, but hopefully some of this discussion helps us get a better grasp on why we're doing what we're doing. So go ahead, Matt. So we have some examples here from guide specs, and I know that I'm in the next slide or two, we're going to show you some examples that are coming right out of master spec, but they're not the only ones doing this either, and that's why I wanted to show these examples. Go ahead, Matt. So this related documents is something that master spec introduced to their own masters quite a few years ago, where they're listing drawings, the conditions, and Division 1, and incorporating all of those documents as part of the current section by the simple reference and calling them related documents. I know that there are also some public agencies that I deal with that require essentially the same kind of reference be inserted in every specification section, and they usually end up requiring some reference back to some standard kind of a manual that the agency uses to help administer the contract. The biggest caution that CSI and the practice guides would have you understand that if you introduce this kind of text anywhere in any section, if you say it once, it must be said everywhere. Because literally, if you could get into the courts, if ever a project makes it that far, not that we want it to be there, but if it's not said everywhere, it could be interpreted that it only applies to those sections where it is stated. And that could be a dangerous opening for anybody trying to contend something in court. So CSI advises against the practice. Master spec does include it as part of their documents, and I say some public agencies actually demand that it be there. Now, master spec and most of the guide masters that I'm familiar with, if you look at the way they arrange the beginning of the spec section, they are not listing these two product paragraphs. That they will list the summary, section includes, and related requirements, but not the other two.
And I think it's important to note that section format, while it lists a number of optional sentence articles and paragraph headings, it does not list that as a recommended option. You know, one of the great things about the CSI documents is that they all have provision for individual preference or firms' practice preferences, but that's one that that didn't even make it into section format at all, which I think says a lot.
Yeah, and I want to go over one comment here from Steve Groth that says master specs editor's notes instruct the specifier to include the related documents article in every section, or leave the statement they have in Division 1, not both. I just completed editing all of our masters to delete the article from each section. And Steve, I will tell you the difficulty is if the projects include other consultants that are contributing to this project manual, that it's highly likely that there will be an inconsistent approach. So if you have some using master spec as the basis, rest assured that the related documents article will be included somewhere and likely not everywhere, and that's one of the dangers in my opinion.
Michael McVitie asks, does not related documents nearly equal related requirements? And I would argue no, because the related documents is so vague. It's like when I'm doing a quality assurance review of drawings, and I see when I'm going through them and familiarizing myself with the content, the first thing I do is I have a magenta highlighter in my hand, and every time I see C architectural, C structural, C mechanical, C plumbing, I highlight those, because my experience is that most of the time those references are bogus, and they're so vague that they wouldn't be any help anyway. Whereas under related requirements, we're going to say, for example, in the masonry section, instead of specifying metal flashing in that section, that you look at section 07-6200 for embedded metal flashing, where it's very specific cross-reference.
Okay. We're coming up on about 10 minutes left for our meeting today, Louis, so I think we'll press ahead.
Press ahead.
We have a couple of other things that we need to...
I'm really enjoying this interaction with our audience, though.
It's great. I love all the questions.
All that means is next month we'll prepare less stuff and expect more questions and comments.
Well, perhaps we'll have the audience, our group, actually do the presentation for us. What do you think?
Of course, we're going to have a special guest star next month.
Next month. But I'm thinking more in the future. We'll get them involved somehow. Okay, yeah. Matt, go ahead on to the next one. And I just wanted to point out that, and I think Louis started to say this earlier, that most of the things in Division 0 are not specifications. There are an awful lot of things in Division 0 that will never be part of the contract documents or are not intended to be part of the contract documents. So we need to be careful in these broad references as to the related documents. Make sure that we're not including something that would bite us later because it was not intended as a contract document.
Yes. Let's push on.
Okay. Go ahead, Matt. So here's one of the things that I do. I don't call anything related requirements. I don't call anything related sections. I just start the summary. I give them the section includes, tell them what to expect in the section, and then simply say C section whatever for stuff that might normally be here. And I use this for a number of different things. I use it for the lintels in Division 5 that might be installed in Division 4. I use it for work that might be governed by an allowance or might be affected by an alternate, to point readers back to Division 1 where it describes what each alternate and allowance might be, and to the other technical sections. And for the example here, pointing to Division 7 for flashings used in masonry. So I think that it's a better approach because we're not labeling why the statement is there, but we're simply providing the statement to say, go see this, it's important. Otherwise I wouldn't have written it. Have you tried something like this, Louis?
No, no, I haven't. But it's a very clean thing. On the other hand, if you don't use the summary as the title for the article, and you title the article "Section Includes," then it kind of makes sense to have a related requirements or related sections article. But this is certainly an appropriate way to handle it, and results in a clean and brief expressions that would be very user-friendly.
Yeah, I think it leaves you open to use it how you think is appropriate instead of trying to force some predefined label as to why you might include the statement.
Yeah. My only hang-up is I've always disliked the word summary for the article. I'd rather just start with section includes, but that's just my personal idiosyncrasy.
Okay, well, I can understand that too, both ways. All right. Gosh, I thought I might get a little bit of reaction to this.
Edward Heinen asked, would you typically also make the same cross-reference to metal flashing, for example, in Part 2 of the spec section?
And I would answer you, Edward, if I make the reference here in the summary, I most likely would not make the same reference in Part 2.
I think he's referring to the fact that in a lot of master spec sections, for example, in Part 2, it will say sealant and then refer you to the sealant spec section there rather than putting it up front. And sometimes, well, actually they have it both places, and theoretically I suppose you're supposed to edit one or the other out, but they do sometimes do that both in Part 2 and in Part 3.
Should we say it once?
And let's not even get into how many times they say comply with manufacturer's written instructions in Part 3.
Okay, and that would be my response really, Edward, is that I try to say the information only once, and where I think it's important, I will put it under the summary article and not repeat the same kind of information in Part 2 or Part 3.
The problem to my thinking is that when you list the, let's take the sealants example, and you put it in Part 2, I think there's sort of an implication that the sealant that you have a preference for the sealant to be installed by whatever subcontractor is going to be doing the work of that particular section. Whereas if you list it up front in the summary or the related requirements, then that leaves it a little bit more open that you're not expressing a preference as to who should install it. I mean, the contractor can go ahead and assign the sealants around the door frames to the guy that installs the doors, but if he wants to do, I'd rather list it up front so that because many contractors will have a single subcontractor do all the exterior sealants at once. Anyway.
Okay, we have a couple more comments. One from Alan Itzkowitz says his preference is to include the cross-reference in Part 2, and then Edward Heinen says, I can't keep track of all the cross-references. And I think that goes back to let's try to say it once. And honestly, whether you're saying it here in the summary article, Part 1 or Part 2, yes, I would agree. Let's say it once someplace and say it where we believe is going to be the best place for a contractor to find the information, and leave it at that. And hopefully at that point you know where to look for the cross-references that you've inserted.
Right. I think we need to pretty much wrap up, David. I'm sorry we didn't get to the end of everything.
Okay.
What's on the next slide, Matt?
Next one's for you.
Oh, okay. I will just speak very briefly to this because I did include this in a tweet to try to attract some attention to our presentation. I think the references article is the most misunderstood article in section format because people don't realize that it doesn't really require the contractor to do anything. All it is the formal, lengthy statement of the entire title of reference documents that are referred to only by their alphanumeric designation in parts 2 and 3. So for example, in concrete, you have ASTM C150 that covers Portland cement, and under the references you would list the full formal title of that ASTM section. I never use this, and I've never had a contractor call up and say, hey, what is ASTM E84? You know, what's the name of that so I can find it? That doesn't happen. But many government agencies really like to see that level of formality, and so we have to put that in there. And then some uninformed or underinformed specifiers will list a whole bunch of everything they can think of, put it in there as weasel words, thinking that maybe something in one of those obscure sections will get them out of trouble if they haven't done their homework, and it won't work. It won't work, folks. So in general, like I say, some public agencies really like to see that kind of stuff, but most normal human being projects, it's unnecessary.
Right. I agree with you totally, Lois. I avoid this one like the plague if I can, and only put it in when absolutely required by either a client or an owner.
Okay. Next month, we have a guest speaker, Liz O'Sullivan, who is an independent specifier in the Denver area and is a very technically knowledgeable and articulate young lady that David and I have had the privilege of meeting and talking with. And she's going to talk to us about the pros and cons, the challenges and blessings of being an independent specifications consultant. And David knows all about, since he runs the largest spec consulting business in the country. And I have always been an in-house specifier, so I'll try to keep our feet planted firmly on the ground and not get too pie in the sky. But I think you'll really enjoy listening to Liz sharing some ideas about how she got started in the business and what you need to do, because I'm sure there are other people in our audience who might be interested in that as a career path.
I think you're absolutely right, and I look forward to hearing from her. Liz is a great speaker, and I've known her for a number of years, so looking forward to hearing what she has to say.
And at the convention, she's going to lead a panel discussing some practical stuff about accounting for independent specifications consultants. Like my old boss said, anybody can do a set of drawings and specs, but what separates the men from the boys, pardon that sexist remark, is getting the work in the first place and getting paid for it when you get it done. I'm sure David has some horror stories about that second aspect.
We're not going to go there. So
okay.
Anyhow, we look forward to seeing everybody who may be attending Construct. Please try to make your presence known. Let Liz and I know that you're going to be there. Hopefully we'll be able to connect somehow or other. Maybe we can twist Hanley Wood's arm into providing a space for us to meet up at some point, say hello, and at least greet each other. That way we get to place a face with a name, and you get to see who we are and make a better connection. But next month, our meeting's when, Lewis, the 5th?
Yes, and maybe we'll post our photos so that you can recognize us on the floor, and we'd be happy to talk to you. That
would be great. Look forward to seeing everybody. So next month, we're here back again, first Thursday, the 5th, with Liz O'Sullivan. We'll see you again here at 3 o'clock Eastern, and keep your cards and letters coming, as Lewis likes to say. We love to hear your ideas and thoughts about what future programs should be.